I was the guy who followed the rules. I didn't cheat, didn't lie, didn't skip steps. Grew up in Oregon, worked my way through school, married my college sweetheart, and started building the life people nod at approvingly. White picket fences and all that. My name's Ryan. I used to be a high school English teacher. Past tense. Back then, I'd been married to Megan for almost 6 years. She worked as a communications consultant for a tech company, which sounded fancy, but mostly meant she spent her days in Zoom meetings and using words like synergy without irony. We had a decent house in Portland, no kids, but we talked about it often. She wanted to wait until we were more stable. I didn't argue. Stability was sort of my thing. Then came the panic attacks. I don't know what triggered them exactly. Maybe it was the burnout from teaching, the sense of uselessness creeping in after years of underfunded schools and administration nonsense. Or maybe it was something deeper, something I hadn't been honest with myself about. But they started coming fast. At the grocery store, in staff meetings, once even during sex. Megan was concerned at first. Supportive. She suggested I see someone. That's how I met Dr. Eric Nolan. He had that whole NPR voice, book-lined office vibe. Wore linen shirts and smiled in that calm, non-judgmental therapist way that made you feel like you could confess to murder and he'd just offer you a tissue. Eric was the first person I ever really opened up to. About the panic, about my fears, about my marriage. About how I sometimes felt like Megan was slipping away from me. Too distracted, too distant. He listened, nodded, asked questions. It felt like safety. For once. I saw him twice a week. Megan said she was glad I was taking control of my mental health. I started journaling, meditating, reading again. I thought things were getting better. Until I came home early one Tuesday. It was supposed to be a district-wide teacher training day. But the power went out mid-morning at the venue, and they sent us home. I didn't text Megan. Just picked up some pastries from the bakery near our place and headed back, thinking maybe we could eat together for once. Her car was in the driveway. That surprised me. She normally worked from a co-working space across town on Tuesdays. I opened the front door, walked in, and heard the muffled laughter upstairs. At first, I thought maybe she was on a call. But something didn't sit right. I froze in the hallway. The bedroom door was ajar. I heard voices. One was hers. The other was Eric's. I didn't need to hear anything more. I didn't go in. I didn't barge through the door or scream or throw anything. I just stood there, listening for maybe 20 seconds, until the sound of his laugh twisted something in my gut, and I turned around. I left the pastries on the kitchen counter and walked out. Later that night, Megan texted me, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. The next day, I called the school, said I was taking leave. They didn't ask many questions. I had vacation days saved up. Then I emailed Eric and canceled all my future sessions. He replied with something vague and professional, ending with, "I understand and support your choice." I bet he did. Megan showed up at my sister's place 2 days later. I was staying in her guest room. Megan knocked on the door like she had a right to still be part of my life. My sister, God bless her, answered the door and told her to get the hell off the porch. She never even let her in. That was the last time I saw Megan face to face. I filed for divorce quietly. No drawn-out drama. Oregon's no-fault system made it easy. We didn't have kids. The house went on the market. We split the sale. I kept my car and a few boxes of stuff. She kept whatever was left. I didn't care. The therapist, Eric, didn't say a word. Not to me. Not publicly. Why would he? It'd destroy his career. Funny thing, though, there's a loophole in ethics boards. They technically frown upon relationships with former clients' spouses, but it's not automatic disbarment. Not unless someone files a complaint. I didn't. Not then. I went quiet instead. Quit my job. Deleted social media. Let them live whatever twisted version of a new life they thought they deserved. People kept asking if I was okay. I said I was adjusting. I smiled through gritted teeth. I told myself it would pass. But it didn't. It just buried itself deeper. For months, I didn't sleep properly. I couldn't trust people. Not even myself. I replayed every session I'd had with Eric, every secret I'd shared, every vulnerable moment. And the thought that kept stabbing me awake at night was this. Did he use it against me? Did he take what I said about Megan, our marriage, my doubts, and use it to get closer to her? I'll never know. And honestly, it doesn't matter. Because after that, something in me broke. Or maybe, something in me woke up. I stopped trying to fix myself. Stopped trying to be the bigger person. Stopped trying to hold on to the idea that life had to be fair. I didn't get angry. I didn't throw tantrums. I didn't start plotting some elaborate revenge. I just disappeared. Let them think they won. Let them move on. But not everything stays buried forever. And secrets? Secrets have a way of showing up at the worst possible moment, especially when you know exactly where to leave them. After the divorce finalized, I moved down to Ashland, Oregon, a quiet town where no one knew me and no one asked questions. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore. It smelled like old paper and dust, and the plumbing wheezed in the winter, but it was cheap and peaceful. That's all I needed. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my sister. Just left her a letter with a new P.O. box in case anything urgent came up. She didn't press. I think she understood I needed space. Needed time. Truthfully, I needed distance, not just from them, but from who I had been. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be the person everyone expected me to be. No more lesson plans. No more PDA meetings. No more pretending like I wasn't screaming inside. I took a job shelving books at a university library. Night shift. Barely spoke to anyone. I told people my name was Ryan. Just Ryan. I kept my head down, paid in cash, and stayed off the grid. No therapy. No social media. No contact with Megan, obviously. And Eric? I couldn't even say his name out loud without feeling like I needed a shower. At first, I kept checking their social profiles, her LinkedIn. I wanted to know how long it took for them to go public. It didn't take long. 3 months after the divorce, Megan updated her relationship status. Dating Dr. Eric Nolan. So casual. Like he wasn't the man who sat across from me as I spilled my guts about my failing marriage. Like he wasn't the man who had told me I was safe with him. That he respected my trust. I stopped checking after that. Let them live whatever new life they built on top of me. People think the opposite of revenge is forgiveness. It's not. It's forgetting. And I made it a point to forget them. Day by day, hour by hour. I erased them from my mind like wiping chalk off a board. It didn't happen quickly. Some nights, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, remembering how Megan used to trace circles on my hand while I talked about my students. Or how Eric once said, healing takes time, but honesty accelerates it. What a line. I bet he used it on her too. But I kept going. I went for long walks before dawn, watched old movies at the library's screening room, read biographies of forgotten presidents and scientists, and people who mattered once. I started cooking. Really cooking. Not just eggs and toast, actual meals. I found something oddly comforting about chopping onions, setting timers, learning to do something purely for myself. I even took an online course in digital marketing, of all things. Something about it fascinated me, the way ads worked, the psychology of attention, the algorithms of influence. It felt like looking behind the curtain of the modern world. I told people I was just keeping busy, that I wasn't interested in returning to teaching. They'd nod, like they understood. No one ever really asked why. They never asked about Megan or Eric, which was good, because I never would have answered. I stayed quiet for almost 4 years. That part is important. For years. Long enough for them to stop looking over their shoulders. Long enough for people to forget the scandal, if there ever was one. I mean, let's be honest. Therapist-client boundaries only matter when someone makes a scene. I didn't. I gave them a clean exit. And as far as the world could tell, Megan moved on. Eric kept his license. I disappeared like a ghost. But I never stopped watching. Not obsessively, just enough to stay informed. Just enough to wait. Because here's what most people don't realize about people like Eric. They always want more. And people like Megan? They can't resist the spotlight. It started with a podcast. Eric launched it sometime in the 3rd year of their relationship. The Honest Hour with Dr. Eric Nolan. Just the kind of smug, polished brand I knew he'd love. The whole premise was radical emotional transparency and redefining mental wellness in the digital age. He interviewed authors, influencers, trauma coaches, all very on trend. The podcast grew fast. Too fast. Probably helped that Megan became his unofficial co-host. She started appearing in episodes, talking about her journey through betrayal and forgiveness. I listened to one clip. That was enough. She didn't say my name, obviously. She didn't have to. The phrasing was careful, polished, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. I was in a marriage that lacked real emotional presence. I think a lot of people stay in those spaces out of guilt. But when I met Eric, it was like the first honest connection I'd had in years. Eric agreed, of course. Always so understanding. Always supporting her growth. The podcast hit 1 million subscribers in under a year. They started getting invited to conferences, panels, speaking gigs. Eric became a media figure. Megan became his brand manager. And I was just a footnote. A deleted chapter. I let them have it. Let them bask. Until the cracks started to show. Tiny things, at first. A negative review buried in a subreddit. An anonymous Medium post questioning some of Eric's therapeutic ethics. Whispers. But nothing ever stuck. He'd built too much goodwill. Too much positive PR. I waited. And worked quietly. I took more courses. Learned about IP law, online reputation management, metadata trails. I never hacked anything. That's illegal, and I wasn't stupid. But information? Information is always there, if you know where to look. I started writing again too. Under a pen name. Articles, short pieces, even fake testimonials for wellness sites. Built a small portfolio of emotional intelligence content. Grew a network of burner accounts and ghostwriters. Harmless stuff. Untraceable. No one noticed. No one ever does when you're quiet. That's the thing about disappearing. It only works if you make people think you've really let go. Like you're off somewhere healing. Finding peace. Growing mushrooms in your backyard. But me? I wasn't healing. I was studying. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew their whole identity, their entire public image, depended on the illusion of truth. And if I could control that illusion, even just a little, I could burn it all down without lighting a single match. A few Reddit posts from new accounts popped up in psychology forums. Is Dr. Eric Nolan violating patient-therapist boundaries? Why isn't anyone talking about how he started dating his client's wife? They didn't go viral or anything. Got a few upvotes, a few indignant defenders, a few people asking questions. Then it happened again on Twitter. Same question, phrased slightly differently. Asked by a concerned listener, who just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, nothing major. Just a few ripples in the otherwise glassy surface of Eric's new empire. A flinch, not a wound. That's how it had to start. Because if you push too hard, too fast, people dig in. They defend the ones they've already bought into. That's the danger of fame built on intimacy. It breeds fierce loyalty. People want to believe in you. But if you make them just slightly uncomfortable, they'll start looking at you differently. The first real crack came when a niche YouTuber, one of those commentary guys who reviews self-help content, made a video titled, "The Therapist Turned Influencer. Is Eric Nolan a fraud?" He was smart. Didn't outright accuse Eric of anything. Just raised some ethical concerns about the power dynamics in his relationship with Megan. Played a few podcast clips. Showed how their timelines overlapped a little too closely. Asked if it was really appropriate for a licensed therapist to capitalize on his partner's divorce trauma for audience growth. The video got traction. 200K views in the first week. I watched every minute of it with my dinner, eating slowly. Eric didn't respond publicly. He never did. That was his brand. Cool detachment. Let the haters talk. Rise above it. But I knew it rattled him. Because the week after the video dropped, he took down the podcast episode where Megan first described her past relationship. Quietly. No announcement. Megan stopped appearing in new episodes altogether after that. She said in a comment on one of their Instagram reels that she was taking a step back to focus on personal growth. Classic PR language. By then, I had long since memorized the entire catalog of their content. Had them archived. Cataloged. I knew every phrase they used, every lie they told, every omission. So I wrote an article. Not under my name, of course. I had a network now, ghostwriters, freelancers, burner domains. The piece was titled, "When Therapists Cross the Line, the Problem No One Wants to Talk About." I submitted it to a mental health ethics blog I knew Eric's audience respected. The editor loved it. Said it was timely. It didn't mention Eric by name. That would have been too obvious, but it laid out the exact kind of situation that had happened to me. Down to the therapist starting a relationship with a patient's spouse within months of the final session. Comments exploded. Wow, this is disturbing. Can you imagine the breach of trust? This is why I don't go to therapy. Still, I never responded. Never commented. Never even checked from my own IP. You have to be careful, patient. You have to let the suspicion grow naturally, like mold. 2 months later, Eric launched a new venture, an online coaching platform. He was transitioning out of private practice to focus on broader wellness work. I'm sure it was officially about scaling his message. But I think we both knew what it really was: damage control. He was distancing himself from his license before someone else could take it. Megan did a live Q&A on Instagram around the same time. She looked tired. The comments were full of compliments, sure, but underneath you could feel it. That twitchy, unsettled energy when people start wondering if they've backed the wrong horse. A few more negative posts started showing up in the wellness community. Some accused Megan of curating trauma for clicks. One Instagram caption she posted, a recycled quote about choosing love after betrayal, got reposted in a meme thread about influencer hypocrisy. Then someone noticed she'd quietly removed all mentions of her previous marriage from her website bio. Someone else pointed out that she and Eric never actually acknowledged how they got together, just vague statements about past pain and healing. The picture started to change. Not quickly, not dramatically, but noticeably. The perfect, polished image they'd spent years building began to feel manufactured. Their fans started asking questions. Then, just when things seemed to be quieting down again, a former client of Eric's, not me, someone real, wrote a Medium post. Why I left therapy with Eric Nolan. She didn't accuse him of misconduct, but she said she felt used, like her emotional struggles were being repackaged for his brand. She described how he'd once made a vague reference to another client's situation, a guy who couldn't keep his wife happy, and how it felt off. That was enough. The post went semi-viral. Got picked up by a larger wellness newsletter. People started combing through Eric's podcast for more references like that. They found a few. Not direct quotes, but close enough. Suddenly, people were listening differently. They weren't hearing wisdom. They were hearing manipulation. Still, no one mentioned me. Not directly. I didn't exist. But I had planted the seeds. And they were growing exactly as I'd hoped. Megan and Eric started posting less. Comments turned defensive. Then off altogether. I stayed quiet. I lived my quiet life in Ashland. Still working at the library. Still cooking my own meals. Still smiling at strangers who had no idea who I used to be. But something had shifted. Their empire wasn't gone. But the foundation? It had started to rot. And no one builds anything lasting on rot. Not for long. It all came down harder than I expected. I thought it would unravel slowly, the way relationships quietly decay when no one's looking. But when their collapse came, it was loud, humiliating, and most importantly, public. The first real break happened during a live panel in Los Angeles. It was one of those self-improvement expos, all TED Talk energy and soft lighting. Eric was a keynote speaker, introduced as a thought leader at the intersection of psychology and personal transformation. Megan was scheduled to co-host a fireside chat afterward. The panel was streamed live on YouTube. I watched it from my laptop, sipping coffee in my little apartment, legs crossed, fully relaxed. Eric started strong, charming, polished, that same half-smile like he already forgave you for disagreeing with him. Then came the Q&A. A woman stood up, probably late 20s, confident voice. She asked, Dr. Nolan, how do you handle situations where your personal life and your therapeutic practice overlap unethically? For example, beginning relationships with people close to former clients? It was so direct, so blunt, the room actually paused. You could feel it. Even through the screen, a little hush of people turning to look. Eric smiled, said something like, That's a good question, but fortunately, I've always adhered strictly to the guidelines set by the APA. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. But Megan? She flinched. Just for a second. Her mouth twitched. Her posture shifted. And it was caught on camera. Reddit had the clip before the live stream even ended. Twitter tore it apart within hours. Who was she talking about? Is there a story here? Why did Megan look like she'd just been slapped? By morning, someone had posted the timeline. A Twitter thread, neatly laid out with dates, archived podcast episodes, and receipts. Eric Nolan treated a man in therapy. That man's wife is now his long-term partner. They went public months after the divorce. But when did the affair actually start? The thread ended with the line. Maybe the guy stayed silent to protect his dignity. But maybe he didn't stay silent forever. It got over 40,000 likes. Eric tried to do damage control. Issued a half-hearted statement on his podcast the next week. No apologies, just vague phrases like misinformation, weaponized narratives, and consensual adult relationships. That episode got review bombed into oblivion. Sponsors began pulling out. And then, the licensing board got involved. Not because of what happened with me. I never filed a complaint, remember, but because that Medium post from the former client prompted others to come forward. People started questioning whether Eric had been discussing client stories too openly on his show. Some began wondering if details had been altered just enough to avoid lawsuits, but not enough to protect identities. That's when the board launched a formal review. Now, don't get me wrong. These reviews take time. Months, even years. But the news of it leaked. And once it did, every blog, every mental health influencer, every podcast that had ever interviewed him began to distance themselves. Invites got revoked. Brand deals evaporated. And Megan? She tried to pivot. She posted a long, teary-eyed video on Instagram talking about how hard the last few months had been, how unfair internet culture was, how women are held accountable for their partner's mistakes. She didn't name Eric, but everyone knew. The comments were brutal. One of the top ones read, "You built your whole platform on honesty and emotional wellness, and you both lied to everyone from the start." Another said, "So, were you sleeping with him while he was your husband's therapist? Or just right after?" She deleted the video within 2 days. Took a break from social media for mental health. But it was too late. The internet doesn't forget. That was the part they hadn't understood, both of them. They thought they could reframe anything, edit the narrative like a brand campaign. But when your whole identity is built on being real, and someone shows the rot behind it, it doesn't just crack, it collapses. Eric tried to pivot too. Released a book. Self-published. Something about emotional evolution in a polarized world. It flopped. Amazon reviews called it pretentious, vague, nothing but recycled therapy quotes strung together by ego. I didn't write those reviews. Didn't have to. The world had caught up. By year's end, his podcast was inactive, the coaching platform had quietly shut down, and his license was officially suspended pending review. He wasn't broke. Not yet. But his image? His platform? His trust? Gone. I saw one final clip of him, filmed by someone at a bookstore event in Denver, maybe 20 people in attendance. He looked smaller somehow. Grayer. Less certain. Still trying to spin the story. Still holding the mic like he deserved to be heard. Megan wasn't there. They'd split by then. Of course they had. No statement. No drama. Just a quiet unfollowing, a photo archive wiped, a ringless finger in a new yoga post. When everything around you is built on lies, truth becomes the strongest solvent. And they had told so many lies, to the public, to each other, to themselves. All I did was show people where to look. I got a letter from my sister around that time. She had seen the drama online. She put it together, figured it was about Megan and Eric, though she didn't say their names. All she wrote was, "It's hard to see someone get exactly what they deserve and still be surprised. But I guess that's the point. You always were patient." She included a photo, me and Megan from our wedding. Smiling. Younger. Happier. I burned it in a ceramic dish behind the bookstore. Didn't feel a thing. Because I knew what was coming next. They thought the worst was over. But they hadn't heard my voice yet. Not really. People always assume revenge is about striking back. It's not. Real revenge isn't loud. It doesn't come with a dramatic confrontation or some gotcha moment in a courtroom. That's movie stuff. Revenge, the real kind, is when someone looks around one day and realizes they've lost everything and can't even point to who took it from them. By the time Eric and Megan were imploding, the world had written their story for them. That's what happens when you live your life online. When you brand your morality, package your pain, and monetize your relationship. You become a public character, a narrative. And I just nudged that narrative where I knew it wanted to go. See, it started the day I walked out of that house. I didn't know what I would do. I just knew I couldn't be who I'd been before. I didn't want revenge, not then. I wanted to disappear. And so I did. But as I sat alone in Ashland, watching their lives unfold, something kept gnawing at me. How they used my pain. Eric took my trust, every private detail I confessed in therapy, and used it to bond with Megan. Megan took my marriage, our history, our struggles, everything we were trying to work through, and turned it into a talking point for her healing journey. They didn't just hurt me. They rewrote me, made me the weak husband, the emotionally distant guy who couldn't keep up. And when they got popular, when the podcast blew up and the brand deals came rolling in, they erased me. So I made a plan. Not all at once, but piece by piece. I started with content. I knew their world. Influencers, wellness junkies, podcast crowds. It's all perception. I studied their language. I wrote fake bios, built ghost accounts, infiltrated communities, created a web of voices that could drip just enough skepticism to fracture the echo chamber. Then I studied Eric. I read the APA code like scripture. I learned the reporting loopholes. I interviewed ex-therapists under fake names. I cataloged every podcast where he blurred the lines between clients and anecdotes. Found subtle legal missteps, not enough to sue, but enough to question. Then I studied Megan. She was the key. People trusted her because she was the hurt one, the betrayed wife who found love again. But I knew her timeline didn't hold up. I still had our shared Google Calendar, synced on an old laptop. Proof she'd visited Eric's office weeks before she ever admitted knowing him. Hotel receipts, travel logs, metadata from old Instagram stories. But I never used it. I didn't have to. I just left the door open. One burner account emailed a journalist at a mid-sized digital mag with an anonymous tip about a prominent therapist who'd begun dating the wife of a patient shortly after treatment ended. I didn't say their names. I just dropped enough specifics to make it interesting. A week later, the YouTuber picked up the story, then Reddit, then the ethics bloggers. They all thought they found it on their own. And I never once touched a law, broke a term of service, or hacked a single thing. All I did was leave breadcrumbs. Because people love a scandal, especially when it's about someone they once admired. As their public image collapsed, I stayed silent. I could have come forward, given interviews, posted my truth. But that's not power. Power is watching the person who stole everything from you try to explain themselves to a world that's no longer listening. Power is silence. But just before I closed the book for good, I gave them one last gift. I wrote an op-ed under my real name. Just once. It was published in Psychology Monthly, titled, "When Trust Becomes Currency, the Invisible Line Therapists Should Never Cross." I never said his name. I never said hers. But anyone who followed the story knew exactly what I was talking about. In the article, I talked about how therapy saved me, until it didn't. How betrayal doesn't always come from enemies, but from people you were told to trust. How healing doesn't require revenge, just clarity. It went viral. Not like their podcast. Not flashy, but real, quiet, devastating. One comment said, "I think I know who this is about." And honestly, I'm glad he finally spoke. That was all I needed. I logged off after that. Deleted every burner. Shut down the fake accounts. Burned every printed draft of the articles I'd ghostwritten. The work was done. Eric still doesn't know how it happened. Megan probably suspects. She always was more intuitive. But even if she guessed, what would she do? Say it out loud? Admit it? They're ghosts now. Not gone, just irrelevant. Still alive, still out there, but their names don't carry weight anymore. Their words don't move anyone. The audience moved on. And me? I teach again. Not high school. A few online writing workshops, some one-on-one coaching. I tell people I took a sabbatical after burnout. I keep it vague. I don't tell them I once burned down 2 people's reputations with nothing but patience, planning, and a laptop. I don't tell them I once loved someone who used my pain as content. I just teach them how to write honestly, how to speak clearly, how to never let anyone else write your story for you. The other day, someone in one of my classes mentioned the Honest Hour podcast. Said, "Didn't that guy get into some kind of controversy?" I just shrugged. "Can't remember," I said. Then I smiled and changed the subject.